The blue sun of Trillar Prime cast long shadows across the ruined capital city. Ambassador Vel stood at the window of what remained of the Coalition Command Center, watching smoke rise from the distant spaceport. 3 years ago, this same view had shown gleaming towers and busy transport lanes filled with ships from 3 different worlds, craters and twisted metal. Vel's hands trembled as he held the datapad showing the latest casualty reports. The Corvin Empire had struck again, this time hitting the outer colonies of Mirith. Entire cities had been reduced to glass and ash. A few survivors spoke of Corvin warships that blotted out the sky, firing weapons that turned mountains to dust. Ambassador, came a voice behind him. Vel turned to see General Keth, his old friend from the early days of the Coalition. The general's proud bearing had crumbled over the past months. His uniform hung loose on his thin frame, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone who had sent too many soldiers to die. The defense fleet at Mirith is gone, Keth said quietly. All 47 ships. They lasted less than 6 hours against the Corvin advance force. Vel closed his eyes. The Coalition had started this war with over 300 warships spread across 12 worlds. Now they had fewer than 30 vessels left, most of them damaged and running low on supplies. The Corvin seemed to have endless resources. Endless. Ships, endless soldiers willing to die for their empire. How long until they reached the core worlds? Vel asked, though he already knew the answer. 3 weeks, maybe 4 if we're lucky, Keth replied. Our intelligence suggests they're gathering their main fleet for a final push. When they come, we won't be able to stop them. Vel walked to his desk and activated the communications array. For the past year, he had sent messages across the galaxy, reaching out to every known civilization, begging for help. Some had replied with sympathy, but claimed they lacked the strength to fight the Corvin. Others had ignored the calls entirely. Too afraid of bringing Corvin attention to their own worlds, the Corvin Empire controlled half the galaxy through fear and superior technology. They had conquered dozens of species over the past century, always following the same pattern. First came the warnings, demanding submission. Then came the demonstration attacks, showing their power. Finally came the invasion fleets, crushing any resistance with overwhelming force. Perhaps we should consider surrender, Keth said, his voice barely above a whisper. At least some of our people might survive under Corvin rule. Vel looked at his friend with sad eyes. That's not true. The Corvin don't want slaves or subjects. They want empty worlds to colonize.
How?
Every species that has surrendered to them has vanished within a generation. Ambassador turned back to his communications array and began typing another message. He had sent hundreds of these desperate calls, but he couldn't stop trying. Somewhere in the vast galaxy, there had to be someone willing to help. Someone with the strength and courage to stand against the Corvin Empire. The message was simple and direct. He explained the Coalition's situation, their dwindling forces, their desperate need for military aid. He included tactical data about Corvin capabilities, hoping some advanced civilization might find weaknesses his own people had missed. He ended with a plea that came from his heart. Any species willing to stand with us against tyranny, please respond. We offer everything we have in return for your help. Vel transmitted the message on all known frequencies, broadcasting it toward every star system in the galactic database. Then he sat back and waited, just as he had done so many times before. Hours passed in silence. Keth brought him reports from other Coalition worlds, each one worse than the last. The Corvin were moving, faster than expected, burning through outer defenses like they were paper. Refugee ships streamed toward the core worlds, carrying survivors who spoke of horrors beyond imagination. Then, just as Vel was preparing to leave for the night, the communications array chirped, an incoming message on a frequency he didn't recognize. From a star system that wasn't in any of their databases, the signal was weak but clear, coming from somewhere on the galactic rim. Vel's hands shook as he opened the message. The transmission was audio only, spoken in accented but clear Coalition. Standard. The voice was calm, almost casual, belonging to someone who sounded remarkably similar to Vel's own species, but with subtle differences in tone and rhythm. "This is Fleet Commander Stone of the Human Defense Force," the voice said. "We have received your call for aid against the Corvin Empire. We have reviewed your tactical data and casualty reports. Humanity has voted to intervene." Vel felt his heart skip a beat. He had never heard of humans before, but someone had actually responded. Someone was willing to help. "We are dispatching a fleet to your coordinates," the voice continued. "Our estimated arrival time is 7 days. Prepare your forces for coordinated action. Humanity is coming." The message ended there, leaving Vel staring at the communications array in amazement. He quickly ran the transmission through the Coalition's xenobiology database, but found no records of any species called humans. The energy signatures in the message suggested their technology was decades behind Corvin standards, possibly even behind Coalition technology. Keth entered the room just as Vel was running the analysis. "Any word from the outer colonies? Something better?" Vel said, his voice filled with hope for the first time in months. "We have allies coming. A species called humans. They say they're sending a fleet." Keth looked at the data on Vel's screen and frowned. "I've never heard of them. Their technology readings are concerning. These humans might be brave, but if their equipment is this primitive, they'll be slaughtered by the Corvin." Vel stood up and walked back to the window. The smoke was still rising from the spaceport, but somehow the sight didn't seem as hopeless as it had before. One had answered their call. Someone was willing to fight beside them, even if it meant facing the most powerful military force in the galaxy. "Maybe," Vel said quietly, "but they're coming anyway. That has to count for something." Neither of them could have imagined what humanity would bring to their war.
Oh.
Neither could have guessed that in responding to their call for aid, they had awakened something that would change the galaxy forever. The Corvin Empire had faced many enemies over the centuries. They had never faced anything like what was coming from the rim of known space. In 7 days, everything would change. 7 days later, Admiral Rax stood on the bridge of the Coalition flagship, watching 12 strange vessels emerge from hyperspace. The human fleet was smaller than he had hoped, but larger than he had feared. Their ships looked different from anything in the galactic databases, with sharp angles and dark metal hulls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The lead human vessel was massive, easily the size of a Corvin battlecruiser, but its design was completely alien to Coalition eyes. Where most galactic ships were built for efficiency and speed, the human ships looked like they were built for war. Every surface bristled with weapons, armor plating, and sensor arrays. These were not exploration vessels or trade ships converted for combat. These were pure warships. Incoming transmission from the human flagship, reported Communications Officer Tarn. "They're requesting permission to come aboard for a tactical briefing." Rax nodded. "Grant permission. Have security teams stand ready, but keep them out of sight. We don't know anything about these humans yet." An hour later, Rax waited in the main conference room as the human delegation arrived. He had expected aliens as strange as their ships, but the humans looked remarkably similar to his own people. They walked on 2 legs, had 2 arms, and faces that showed clear expressions. The main difference was their size. They were slightly taller and more muscular than most Coalition species. The human leader introduced himself as Fleet Commander Stone. He was an older male, with gray hair and scars on his hands that spoke of years in combat. His uniform was simple and practical, without the decorations that most galactic officers wore to show their rank and achievements. "Thank you for coming," Rax said, gesturing to the seats around the conference table. "I must admit, we know nothing about your species. Your star system isn't in any of our databases." Stone sat down and looked directly at Rax with pale eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "We're from the Outer Rim. We keep to ourselves most of the time. But when we received your message about the Corvin, our government decided to act. You understand what you're facing?" asked General Keth, who had traveled from Trellery Prime for this meeting. "The Corvin Empire has conquered half the galaxy. Their technology is centuries ahead of most species. Their military has never been defeated in open battle." Stone nodded calmly. "We've studied your tactical reports and reviewed the battle recordings you sent. The Corvin are impressive fighters. It's very organized, very efficient. They follow standard galactic warfare protocols." Rax felt a chill at something in Stone's tone. "Standard protocols?" What do you mean by that? They fight like civilized beings, Stone replied. They target military installations, avoid unnecessary civilian casualties, accept surrenders, take prisoners. They wage war according to established galactic conventions. That sounds like a good thing, Tarn said from his position near the door. Stone looked at him with those pale eyes. It can be. But it also makes them predictable. They expect their enemies to follow the same rules, fight the same way, think the same way. The Corvin have been successful because every species they've faced has played by those rules. Keth leaned forward. And humans don't? Humans fight to win, Stone said simply. We've been at war for most of our history, not with aliens, but with each other. We've learned that in a real war, there are no rules except victory or death. The room fell silent. Rax studied the human commander's face, trying to understand what he was suggesting. You're talking about total war? Most civilized species abandoned such concepts centuries ago. Most civilized species haven't faced extinction, Stone replied. You called for aid, Admiral. We're here to provide it. But you need to understand what that means. We're not here to fight a limited engagement or negotiate a treaty. We're here to end this war completely. Stone activated a portable display device and showed tactical formations that made Rax's blood run cold. The human battle plans didn't just target Corvin military forces. They included attacks on supply lines, communication networks, civilian infrastructure, and government facilities. It was warfare on a scale that hadn't been seen in the galaxy for millennia. These tactics, Rax said slowly, they'll cause massive casualties. It's not just military, but civilian populations across dozens of worlds. The Corvin have been causing massive casualties for 3 years, Stone replied. The difference is our approach will end it quickly instead of letting it drag on for decades. A short, brutal war saves more lives than a long, civilized one. General Keth stood up from the table. You didn't call for help so you could commit genocide on our behalf. We wanted allies, not war criminals. Stone remained seated, his expression unchanged. Then you should have been more specific in your message. Said you were facing extinction. Your species would be wiped out if the Corvin weren't stopped. What did you think we would do? Show up with flowers and peace treaties? We thought you would help us fight back, defend our worlds, maybe push the Corvin back to their own territory, Rax said. That's not fighting back, Stone said, just delaying the inevitable. The Corvin will rebuild their fleets, develop new weapons, and attack again in 10 or 20 years. Your children will face the same war you're facing now. Is that what you want? The room was quiet except for the hum of the ship's systems. Rax looked at his fellow officers and saw his own doubts reflected in their faces. They had begged for help, but they hadn't considered what that help might look like. What are you proposing exactly? Rax asked finally. Stone stood up and walked to the viewport, looking out at the human fleet floating in space. We dismantled the Corvin Empire completely, not just their military, but their ability to make war at all. We target their shipyards, their weapon factories, their training facilities. We disrupt their supply chains and communication networks. We make it impossible for them to threaten anyone ever again. And if they surrender, then the war ends and they get to rebuild as a peaceful civilization. But they don't get to keep their empire or their military. They don't get to remain a threat to other species. Keth shook his head. The galactic community will never accept such methods. You'll be branded as criminals, just like the Corvin. Stone turned back to face them. The galactic community has been accepting Corvin methods for over a century. They've watched dozens of species get wiped out without lifting a finger to help. Now someone finally answers your call for aid, and you're worried about what the same people who abandoned you will think? Rax realized that Stone was right about one thing. The Coalition had sent messages to every major power in the galaxy, and none of them had responded. They had been left to face extinction alone until these humans arrived from nowhere. We need time to consider this, Rax said. Stone nodded. You have 3 days. Our scouts report a major Corvin fleet moving toward your core worlds. They'll arrive in less than a week. You can accept our help on our terms, or you can face them alone like you've been doing for the past 3 years. The human delegation left without another word, returning to their dark ships that waited in space like sleeping predators. Rax remained at the viewport long after they were gone, wondering if they had called for salvation or damnation. War Master Gorth stood in the command center of his flagship, watching the tactical display show his massive fleet approaching the Coalition's core worlds. 237 vessels of various sizes carrying enough firepower to crack planets. It was overkill for the handful of Coalition ships that remained, but Gorth believed in decisive victories. "Sir," reported his intelligence officer, a thin Corvin named Vrek, "our scouts have detected unknown vessels in the target system. 12 ships of unfamiliar design." Gorth barely glanced at the report. "Probably refugees from one of the outer colonies, or maybe another species foolish enough to think they can help the Coalition. Either way, they're not our concern." But Vrek looked worried. "The energy signatures are strange, sir. These ships don't match any known galactic designs. Their technology seems primitive, but their tactics during our probe attacks were unusual." "Unusual how?" Gorth asked, finally paying attention. "They didn't retreat when our scouts engaged them." Ships. The collision destroyed both enemy vessels, but it also took out some of our most advanced sensor platforms. Gorth frowned. Ramming attacks were considered a last resort by most civilized species, used only when all other options were exhausted. No commander would waste ships in suicide attacks during a minor skirmish. It made no tactical sense. "What species are we dealing with?" "They call themselves humans, sir. We've never encountered them before. They seem to be from the Outer Rim territories." The Corvin Empire had dominated the galaxy for so long that Gorth rarely faced truly unknown opponents. Most species followed predictable patterns in warfare, using similar strategies and technologies. It was one reason the Empire had been so successful. They could anticipate enemy moves and counter them effectively. "Order the main fleet to attack formation," Gorth commanded. "We'll crush these humans along with the Coalition forces. Make. An example of anyone foolish enough to interfere with the Empire?" 3 hours later, the two fleets faced each other in the space around Trillery Prime. The Corvin formation was a perfect demonstration of galactic military doctrine, heavy battleships in the center, lighter cruisers on the flanks, fighters screening the advance. It was a formation that had conquered dozens of star systems. The human fleet looked chaotic by comparison. Their 12 ships were spread out in no recognizable pattern, moving independently rather than as a coordinated unit. 2 Gorths trained. They looked like amateurs who had never fought a real space battle. "Begin the attack," Gorth ordered. "Target their largest vessels first. Once we break their formation, the rest will surrender." The Corvin fleet opened fire with precision that had been perfected over centuries of conquest. Plasma beams and missile volleys reached across space toward the human ships. Any normal fleet would have been crippled by the opening barrage, but the humans didn't react like a normal fleet. Instead of trying to dodge the incoming fire, several human ships accelerated directly toward the Corvin line. They took massive damage but kept coming, returning fire with weapons that seemed crude but surprisingly effective. Sir Vrek called out, "The enemy is not following standard evasion patterns. They're actually flying into our weapons fire." Gorth watched in confusion as a human destroyer, its hull already burning from multiple hits, crashed into one of his cruisers. The collision tore both ships apart, but the explosion also damaged to nearby Corvin vessels. It was a trade that made no sense. 1 enemy ship for 3 friendly ones should have been a victory, but somehow it felt like a loss. "What are they doing?" Gorth muttered. "Don't they understand basic fleet tactics?" The answer became clear as the battle continued. The humans weren't trying to win through superior firepower or clever maneuvering. They were trying to cause maximum damage regardless of their own losses. Every human ship that died took multiple Corvin vessels with it through ramming attacks, self-destruction, or by drawing enemy fire while damaged Coalition ships escaped. Within an hour, Gorth had lost 30 ships while destroying only 6 human vessels. By all military logic, he should have been winning decisively. But his fleet was in chaos, with damaged ships trying to avoid suicide attacks while maintaining formation. "Pull back to long range," Gorth ordered. "We'll destroy them with concentrated fire from a safe distance." But the humans adapted to that. Tactic 2. They split up and began hit-and-run attacks on isolated Corvan ships, using the wreckage of earlier battles as cover. When Corvan fighters tried to pursue them, the humans led them into debris fields where the smaller craft were destroyed. By their own weapons, fire bouncing off twisted metal, they're hacking our communication systems, Vrak reported with growing alarm. They're broadcasting some kind of psychological warfare on all frequencies. Gorth listened to the transmissions with growing unease. The humans weren't just sending random noise or propaganda. They were broadcasting detailed intelligence about Corvan military operations, naming specific commanders and their families back home. They knew things about the Empire that should have been impossible for outsiders to discover. But worse than the intelligence was the tone of the broadcasts. The human voices were calm, almost cheerful. As they described exactly how they planned to dismantle the Corvan Empire piece by piece, they talked about destroying supply depots, attacking civilian infrastructure, and hunting down military leaders with the casual manner of people discussing dinner plans. "This is Fleet Commander Stone to all Corvan forces," came a voiceover. "The main communication channel. Your War Master Gorth has a wife named Kel and 2 children on the colony world, Corvex Prime. His brother commands the orbital defense station there. We know this because we've been studying your empire for weeks while you wasted time with conventional attacks." Gorth felt ice in his veins. The humans knew about his family, knew about military installations that were supposed to be secret. How is that possible? "You fight like you expect your enemies to be reasonable," Stone continued. "You target military installations, avoid civilian casualties, follow the rules of civilized warfare. That's admirable, but it makes you predictable. Humans don't follow your rules, War Master. We make our own." Another human ship exploded as it rammed a Corvan battleship, but not before launching boarding pods that attached to nearby vessels. Within minutes, those ships began firing on their own fleet as human soldiers took control of their weapon systems. Vrak said, his voice shaking. "We're losing ships faster than we're destroying them." And the humans seemed to be calling in reinforcements. Long-range sensors are detecting more unknown vessels approaching the system. Gorth stared at the tactical display, watching his perfect fleet formation dissolve into chaos. The humans had turned the battle into something that wasn't really a battle at all. It was more like watching predators hunt prey, except he couldn't tell which side was which. "Order a withdrawal," he said finally. "We'll regroup and develop new tactics for dealing with these humans." But even as his fleet began to retreat, Gorth knew that something fundamental had changed. For the first time in his career, he had faced an enemy that didn't fight the way wars were supposed to be fought. And for the first time in the Empire's history, a Corvan fleet was running away from a smaller force. The humans had won their first battle. Gorth suspected that the real war was just beginning. 3 weeks after the first battle, Admiral Rax stood in the Coalition Command Center, watching reports stream in from across the galaxy. What he saw made no sense according to everything he knew about warfare. The Corvan Empire, which had seemed unstoppable just a month ago, was falling apart at incredible speed. "Another supply convoy hit at the Valdrus system," reported Communications Officer Tarn. "The humans didn't even try to capture the ships. They just destroyed everything and disappeared." Rax studied the tactical map showing human fleet movements. There were now over 60 human vessels spread across Corvan space, but they weren't operating like any military force he had ever seen. Instead of conquering territory or establishing bases, they moved like a disease through the Empire's infrastructure. "They're not fighting a war," General Keth observed, joining Rax at the display. "They're performing surgery. It's cutting out everything that makes the Corvan Empire function." The humans had been busy since their victory at Trilari Prime. More ships had arrived from their mysterious home system, but these weren't just military vessels. Some were converted civilian craft. Others looked like they had been built in shipyards that operated by completely different rules than the rest of the galaxy. Sir Tarn called out, receiving a transmission from Fleet Commander Stone. He's requesting a meeting with Coalition leadership. An hour later, Stone arrived at the command center with a small team of human officers. Rax noticed that several of them looked very young, barely old enough to be soldiers by Coalition standards. But their eyes held the same calm intensity that he had seen in Stone during their first meeting. "The situation has changed," Stone said without preamble. "The Corvan are adapting faster than we expected." They're abandoning conventional tactics and starting to fight like us. Rax felt a chill. What do you mean? One of the younger humans, a female officer named Reed, activated a portable display. 3 days ago, the Corvin attacked the civilian colony at Nexus 7. They didn't demand surrender or try to capture infrastructure. They just glassed the entire planet from orbit. 12 million people died in less than 6 hours. The room fell silent. Nexus 7 was a research colony, completely defenseless and of no military value. The Corvin had never attacked purely civilian targets before. They're trying to force us to spread our forces, Stone continued. Make us choose between protecting civilians and maintaining our offensive operations. It's actually a smart strategy. General Keth looked horrified. Smart? They murdered 12 million innocent people? Yes, Stone replied calmly. And if we let that stop us from finishing this war, they'll murder 12 million more. The Corvin are learning that civilized warfare won't work against us, so they're becoming uncivilized. This is what we expected to happen. Rax stared at the human commander. You expected this? Human history is full of wars that escalated beyond all reason, Reed explained. When one side breaks the rules, the other side has to choose between losing or breaking bigger rules. The Corvin just made their choice. Stone walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars. The question is, what choice will you make? We can end this war quickly if we continue our current strategy, but it's going to get much uglier before it's over. What are you planning? Keth asked. Total war, Stone said simply. It's not just against their military, but against their entire ability to make war. We're going to shut down their factories, destroy their shipyards, disrupt their communication networks, and eliminate their government structure. When we're finished, the Corvin Empire won't exist anymore. The display showed human fleet positions throughout Corvin space. They were everywhere, hitting targets that seemed random but were actually carefully chosen to cause maximum disruption. Supply depots, training facilities, communication relays, administrative centers, all of them burning. The Corvin have never faced anything like this, Reed continued. Their entire military doctrine is based on fighting other civilized species who follow galactic warfare conventions. They don't know how to respond to enemies who ignore those conventions completely. But they're learning, Tarn observed. You said so yourself. Stone nodded, which is why we need to finish this before they learn too much. Every day we delay gives them more time to adapt. And the longer this war continues, the more civilians will die on both sides. Rax looked at the casualty reports on his desk. Numbers were staggering, but not in the way he had expected. Yes, millions of Corvin civilians had died as their infrastructure collapsed. But the human strategy was also saving lives on coalition worlds that would have been targeted if the war had continued conventionally. How many more human ships are coming? Rax asked. All of them, Stone replied. This isn't just a military operation anymore. It's a mobilization of our entire civilization. Every human colony, every industrial facility, every civilian who can hold a weapon, they're all part of this war now. Reed showed them images that made Rax's heart skip. Massive human fleets were gathering at the edge of Corvin space, but many of the ships looked like they had been built by amateurs. Civilian transports with weapons bolted onto their hulls, mining vessels converted into bombers. Even what appeared to be family spacecraft armed with improvised missiles. Your people are sending their children to war, Keth said with horror. Our people are choosing to end this war permanently, Stone corrected. Every human who volunteers for this fight is doing it so their children won't have to. The Corvin Empire has to be destroyed completely, or it will just rebuild and threaten other species in the future. The scale of what Stone was describing was beyond anything in galactic history. Entire civilizations had gone to war before, but never with such total commitment. The humans weren't just fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting to reshape the galaxy itself. What happens to the Corvin people after their empire falls? Rax asked. They get to live peacefully, Stone said. But they don't get to keep their military or their colonies. They'll be confined to their home system under galactic supervision until we're sure they won't try to rebuild their empire. And if they refuse to accept that, Stone's expression didn't change. Then they'll share the fate of their empire. The meeting ended with the coalition leadership agreeing to support the human strategy. They had little choice, really. The humans were going to continue their war with or without coalition approval. At least this way they might have some influence. Over how it ended, as Stone and his officers prepared to leave, Rax called out to him, "Commander, are you sure this is the only way?" Stone paused at the door. "Admiral, your species called for aid because you were facing extinction. We're here to make sure that never happens again. Not to you, not to anyone. But preventing future wars sometimes requires fighting this one without mercy." After the humans left, Rax remained at the viewport, watching their dark ships disappear into hyperspace. The coalition had asked for salvation, and humanity had answered. But the price of that salvation was becoming higher than anyone had imagined. 6 months after the first human ships had arrived at Trilari Prime, War Master Gorth stood in the ruins of what had once been the Corvin Empire's greatest military academy. The building around him was a burned shell, its training facilities destroyed, and its computers wiped clean. He was no longer a War Master of anything. The Empire itself had ceased to exist 3 weeks ago. The humans had done exactly what they promised. They had dismantled the Corvin Empire piece by piece. It's not through massive battles, but through the systematic destruction of everything that made their civilization capable of war. Shipyards, weapons factories, communication networks, government, buildings, military bases, all of them reduced to rubble or captured by human forces. "Sir," came a voice behind him. Gorth turned to see Captain Reed, the young human officer he had been dealing with since his capture. She looked tired, but satisfied, like someone who had just completed a difficult but necessary task. The final Corvin fleet has surrendered at Corvex Prime, Reed reported. Admiral Vex signed the unconditional surrender documents 20 minutes ago. The war is officially over. Gorth nodded slowly. He had expected this news, but hearing it still felt like a physical blow. The Corvin Empire had dominated the galaxy for over a century, had conquered dozens of species, had seemed unstoppable just 6 months ago. Now, it was nothing more than a memory. "What happens to my people now?" Gorth asked. Reed sat down on a piece of broken concrete and pulled out a datapad. "The terms are simple. All former Corvin military personnel will be relocated to your home. System: no Corvin is allowed to leave that system without human approval. All military equipment, including personal weapons, will be destroyed. All former colonies will be given to other species or administered by the galactic community. And if we refuse these terms, then you'll be treated as enemy combatants and dealt with accordingly," Reed said calmly. "But we're hoping you'll choose to rebuild as a peaceful civilization instead." Gorth looked around at the destroyed academy where he had trained as a young officer decades ago. The humans had been thorough in their destruction, but they had also been selective. Hospitals, schools, and civilian infrastructure had been largely spared. It was clear they wanted the Corvin people to survive, just not as a military power. "I need to understand something," Gorth said. "Why did you help the coalition? Your people could have stayed in your own territory and been safe. Empire would never have found you if you hadn't revealed yourselves." Reed was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "Because that's not who we are. When someone calls for help, we answer. It's one of the few things all humans agree on, no matter where we come from or what we believe. But you didn't just help them defend themselves. You destroyed us completely." Reed agreed. "Because helping someone defend themselves isn't enough if the threat will just come back later. We learned that lesson the hard way in our own history. Sometimes the only way to protect innocent people is to make sure the people threatening them can never threaten anyone again." Gorth felt a chill at the matter-of-fact way she said it. The humans spoke about the complete destruction of an interstellar empire the same way most people discussed home repairs as an unpleasant but necessary task. "Your species terrifies the rest of the galaxy," Gorth said. "Do you understand that? Every government, every military leader, every civilian who has heard about what you did to us, they're all afraid that you might decide they're a threat too." Reed smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Could fear prevents wars better? Then treaties do. If every potential aggressor has to ask themselves whether their target might call for human aid, then a lot fewer wars will start. And if someone threatens humanity directly, then they'll discover what we're really capable of, Reed said. What you saw was us being careful and measured. Could have ended this war in a week if we hadn't been trying to minimize civilian casualties. The thought of humans being even more destructive than they had already shown was almost impossible for Gorth to comprehend. They had already rewritten the rules of galactic warfare and demolished the most powerful military in known space. What would they do to an enemy that truly made them angry? There's something else you should know, Reed continued. Earth, our home world, voted on whether to intervene in your war. The decision was unanimous. Every human government, every colony, every individual who was eligible to vote said yes. That's over 40 billion people who agreed that stopping the Corvan Empire was worth any sacrifice. Stared at her. 40 billion people voted for war. 40 billion people voted to help the coalition and end the threat you represented, Reed corrected. The war was just the method we chose to achieve that goal. If you had surrendered immediately, it would have saved everyone a lot of trouble. A communication device on Reed's belt chirped, and she listened to a brief message before standing up. I have to go. The coalition is holding a ceremony to thank human forces for their assistance. You're welcome to watch the broadcast if you want. After Reed left, Gorth found a working display terminal and accessed the galactic news networks. The images he saw would be burned into his memory forever. Massive human fleets in orbit around every former Corvan world, their dark ships standing guard like sleeping predators. Parades on coalition planets where civilians cheered human soldiers as heroes. Diplomatic meetings where other species offered treaties and trade agreements to humanity. But most disturbing of all were the interviews with human civilians, ordinary people, families with children, elderly citizens. All of them speaking calmly about their sacrifice for the war effort. They talked about converting their personal spacecraft into weapons, about sending their young people to fight, about working extra shifts in factories to build more ships. An entire civilization had mobilized for war, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The final image in the broadcast showed Fleet Commander Stone standing at a podium on Trilori Prime, addressing representatives from dozens of species. His words were simple, but carried across the galaxy with the weight of absolute certainty. The Corvan Empire called themselves conquerors, Stone said. They believed that strength gave them the right to dominate others. They were wrong. Strength exists to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Humanity will always answer when peaceful people call for aid. But we will also always ensure that those who threaten the innocent can never do so again. The camera pulled back to show the audience of alien diplomats listening in complete silence. Every face showed the same expression, a mixture of gratitude and terror. They were grateful for humanity's intervention, but they were also terrified of what humanity was capable of. As the broadcast ended, Gorth understood that the galaxy had changed forever. The humans hadn't just won a war. They had established themselves as the ultimate guarantors of peace. No species would ever again be able to build an empire based on conquest and fear, because humanity would be watching. And humanity had proven they would do whatever was necessary to stop them. The Corvan Empire was dead, but its destruction had given birth to something far more powerful. The knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy, there was a species that viewed the protection of innocent life as their sacred duty, and possessed the will and ability to fulfill that duty no matter the cost. In the weeks that followed, Ambassador Vel would send a new message across galactic networks, just as Fleet Commander Stone had predicted. The message was simple but effective to any species considering aggression against peaceful worlds. Remember that humanity is watching, and humanity keeps its promises. The age of galactic empires was over. The age of human protection had begun.